All right, bang. Today is Tuesday. It's June 21st. Welcome to the Dog Walk presented by Barstool Sports. It's Eddie. It's Chief. It is Tinfoil Tuesday. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. I feel like I'm really starting to lean into this Chicago summer. Weather's getting nice. I have been having a great time.
It's great.
Yeah.
Man. It's good stuff.
Yep.
It's just everyone's happier, and it's just a good time.
It's great. And, we're going to go get into it today, but it sounds like doom is coming. So, per usual.
No.
So, we're going to enjoy it while you can.
Doom is coming.
Yeah.
So, if doom is coming, that means that there's no excuse to be having short sex.
Nope. Soak it all in while you can.
Yeah, don't just be a sucker and just having your long-lasting memories be that you don't last long.
Right.
That was pretty good.
That was good.
That was pretty good.
Yeah.
Because the summer days are long, so don't spend it on short sex. Roman swipes are the secret to longer-lasting sex. Roman swipes are uniquely formulated to reduce overstimulation without eliminating sensation altogether. The more consistent you are with the swipes, the longer and better your sex will be. Studies show that on average, after 1 month of using swipes, men last 3 minutes, and after the second month, 5.5 minutes. That's a 340% increase, which is a massive increase.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's the only type of increase that I like seeing go up by that number.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah.
So the swipes are super easy to use. Just take the swipe out and apply it on. Let it dry for 5 minutes. Enjoy longer lasting sex. Go to GetRoman.com/dogwalk to get your first month of swipes for just $5 when you choose a multi-plan. That's GetRoman.com/dogwalk. Go do it, folks. There's no reason not to at this point. Go use some Roman. All right. So today's topic is a little tinfoily.
Little tinfoil.
Yeah,
I think it's, and I want to, it's tinfoil and it's based in reality, but then people are running wild on the internet. So we're talking, there's been all these crazy fires, like an inordinate amount of fires at these food processing plants. And there are segments of the internet that are trying to say it's part of some like global scheme and this and that. And we're gonna talk about that and try to shed some light on kind of the reality of the situation and how that ties into like a growing global problem.
And listen, it's been sent to us a bunch.
Yeah.
It's one of those things too. Like it was a very popular topic of conversation, but nobody knew much about it. I felt it was always just like, "Do you see that?" People are like,
and then you're on to
food
the next
factory
thing.
burned,
Yeah,
and
like
it's everyone's
chicken
like,
egg thing.
Yeah, apparently a lot of them are burning, and everyone's like, "Huh."
Yeah.
And then the conversation just ends there.
Right.
So that's why we wanted to look into it. Well, Chief wanted to look into it. I was very curious as well, obviously. And you find out some things are,
some things are true, and then some people take a kernel of truth and spin it into something that just cannot be proven.
So we want to be clear that that's not what we're doing.
Right.
But we wanted to talk about a topic that's been brought up many times, probably within your circle or whatever, because it was all over Twitter. That picture was all over.
And it's been and it genuinely has been happening a lot. So these food processing plants all over the country, look at fires and accidents happen at factories all the time. Food is no exception to that. It is highly irregular that you have this many fires happening at food processing plants so far in 2022. I think, the last couple of years, I read that there's like an average of like 2 of these, okay? 2 fires at food processing plants across the country is seemingly the average per what I've been able to find on the internet doing research. We're over 20 so far. The first 6 months of this year. So I'll just run down them real quick. So just to give people an idea, because when you hear about like over and over, it's like fucking Christ. So
I mean, that's a massive increase. That's a Roman like sex increase.
340%. Yeah, that's like huge. That's the Roman number. I don't know what the math is on this, but
2 to 20.
Yeah,
that's
so
crazy.
the first one started right here in Illinois, January 2nd. Van Drunen Farms, which is a freeze drying food processing plant. It's an 80,000 square foot place in down in Illinois. It was declared a total loss. Fire started at 6 a.m. No employees were on site. This is like they have plants that company has plants all over the country, but this is their biggest and their quote unquote main facility. Then on January 13th, Cargill had a fire of a 140,000 ton livestock and pet feed mill in Louisiana. Burned for 12 hours, no injuries. The fire was blamed on an explosion. Oregon Potato Company, which is actually in Washington State, they had a big-time fire and they do all sorts of like corn and potato chips in the western United States. That fire happened around noon. Again, no serious injuries. Some people checked in the hospital. Winston Weaver Company, North Carolina, that was January 31st. Massive fire, huge fire. 150 firefighters had to be called in. Everyone, there was like chemicals at some of these freeze dried, and this is a fertilizer place, excuse me. So I remember this happened in like Texas a few years ago. I think it was Texas, where a fertilizer plant caught on fire, and the explosion was like so loud and massive, like it caused like permanent deafness for people all over.
No
So
shit.
yeah, that was several years. I mean, it might be like 5-6 years ago, but it was like a big video on the internet. So they evacuated everyone in a mile radius of that fire. But again, no injuries or deaths. But they had a similar thing happen a few years earlier, and it did kill 15 people. Wisconsin River Meats, overnight fire. Destroyed all the infrastructure of that manufacturing facility. Plant was considered a total loss, but no livestock or employees were injured. And that's one of those things where it's like, okay, like this is, and we'll see some of these. So there's been like plane crashes at some of these, and some of them are like huge losses of the facility that are going to, impact food supply. But other ones, they're like, oh my God, there's another fire. Like, what the fuck? Oh, a plane crashed in this one. What the fuck? But it was like the plane crashed like on property grounds, but didn't cause any damage. Okay. So there's like, when you hear like there's been 22 fires, they're not all created equal. And I think that's like important to remember. And there's not necessarily intentionality. Like there's no like evidence of intentionality where it's like, we're going around to these places for this reason. And we're going to, and it's all, some nefarious group. I don't think there's any evidence to rule that out necessarily at this point, but there's to suggest that it's ironclad, like this is a widespread conspiracy. I think that's wildly inappropriate at this point too, just based on what I'm seeing.
Hey, real quick, Chief, before you continue, did you see Billy Joel's playing in Notre Dame Stadium this Saturday?
No.
He is.
You're kidding. I knew Garth Brooks played there before, and I did not know Billy Joel was going down there.
Billy Joel, Notre Dame Stadium this week. This Saturday.
I'm going to get on Game Time.
The 25th. So, yes, you should get on the Game Time app because the Game Time app is the exclusive ticketing partner of Barstool Sports. It's a ticketing app that makes it easier than ever to score last-minute deals to tickets to sports, concerts, and shows, and they guarantee the lowest price. They crack the code on how to score last-minute deals on last-minute tickets. The biggest last-minute price drops can be found on the seats you thought you could never buy. I've used it for Cubs games. We used it for the Ranger game last month. It's a very easy process. So whether you're spontaneously buying tickets to the concert you've been eyeing or planning ahead for the NFL season, Game Time is the best ticketing app, making your live event experience seamless and affordable. Best part, you get $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app, go to the account tab to create a login and redeem code DOGWALK for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Download Game Time, last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. If you got nothing to do this Saturday, sounds nice. That sounds very nice.
It does sound very nice.
Yeah, so go check out that Game Time app and hitch a ride to South Bend. Go check that out, Notre Dame Stadium.
I kind of feel like we should have a company outing to Wrigley too.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
We'll take all the interns. We'll get on Game Time. The tickets to Wrigley are like $4 now because the Cubs are so bad, and it's so easy to use. I've done it myself multiple times now. So maybe at the end of this month we'll take everybody, including Harry.
Might have to, yeah, including Harry. All right,
if he's good.
Yeah, we can continue the show.
But again, Louis Dreyfus Company, Claypool, Indiana. This is a kind of a bag house used for filtering dust, caught fire at the country's largest soy processing plant. So think of all the things that soy is in these days. Best View Farm, that's another one that's in Vermont. That was February 18th. Shear Foods, Oregon. That actually did injure some people. They make all sorts of like salty snacks, cookies, etc. And it just goes on and on and on and on, to the point that I won't go through all of them, but the list is at the time of this recording, the most recent one, I believe. So we're up to on June 13th, Festive Foods in Belmont, Wisconsin was the latest one. So they had to call in 70 firefighters for that one. 24 departments, 4 different counties. Same thing. Residents within a mile of the plant were advised to keep their windows and doors shut to protect from the dangerous amounts of smoke. They say the fire started in a compressor room for the refrigeration system. and they were, while personnel were performing maintenance. So no injuries reported, but it's just like, it is an insane amount of, and I can understand why people would try to be connecting dots, because it's like, we go from having 2 a year that aren't like necessarily catastrophic to a ton, 26 as of, I think it's 26. And whether they're connected or not, and how much impact they have or not, is kind of yet to be seen. But there's speculation I've seen that this is going to could impact, let's say, the global or the country's food supply by 2%. People are like, 2%. Well, 2% is actually a big deal. Like it's a big deal, especially in this climate, because we're having shortages of things all over the world. So, that stem from a variety of different things. And one of them certainly is something we talked about before, which is the war in Ukraine, where, Ukraine is considered to be like the Iowa and Kansas of Europe. So they grow a ton of grain, and they feed and supply many countries and many people in Europe and in other parts of the world as well. Like, they are an agricultural hub for that region, and it's one of their main exports for the country. Well, not only can they not export anything because Russia has everything, blockaded, and you just can't get, their food out. That war started, I believe, like right after the Olympics, so like March 1st or something like that, which is typically in the spring is when you do all your planting. Nobody's planting anything. And then Russia has been targeting a lot of Ukrainian grain silos. So you have this massive hub of agriculture in that part of the world is just completely taken out of the equation, which, ends up being a supply and demand process, which is going to lead to higher food prices everywhere, because you're going to have more people, more countries across the world competing for a smaller piece of a smaller pie. So it's like, hey, like Ukraine's out, we got to get our grain and our calories from somewhere. So we're going to go X, Y, and Z place. The other thing on top of that, one of the world's largest producers of fertilizer for big agriculture is Russia. So thanks to some sanctions, you're not able to get and use Russian-produced fertilizer the way that you were historically. So not only are you removing all of Ukraine and all of their supply from the global agriculture system, but the places that would historically would use fertilizer can't get it, from Russia. So that price goes up, and the amount of, like, some people just can't, farmers can't get it, period. So you're trying to grow food without fertilizer or use substitutes, like kind of old school organic farming, not by necessarily because you want to go organic, but because you have no choice. But that will, if you make that switch to organic on a dime, your yield for your crops is going to be much lower, because those plants just don't have the food that they need from the fertilizer to grow and produce at the rate that they would normally. So you're having two prongs where you have this supply chain, this major disruption to domestic in America, where you're having all these fires and issues. You're having the lack of grain coming out of Ukraine, and you're having these fertilizer things are all going to contribute. It's like people are complaining about prices now. I don't think we've even
reached the surface,
come close.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is like a thing historically that it has a term. Okay, it's called bread wars. That not almost every revolution, but every time that there is a significant loss or significant uproar with different societies, if you really dig down to it, the cause is price and availability of food. I mean, this goes all the way back to the French Revolution. So you've heard of Marie Antoinette, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Marie Antoinette, like one of her famous quotes was, "Let them eat cake," because they could not, like that was one of the impetuses for the French Revolution going insane, is that you had this bourgeois, upper 1% class, and the vast majority, and there are other factors, okay, but they were so, they were literally going hungry because they could not get food, and that is what spurred, at its core, again, among other things, because people are sticklers about this stuff, but food availability was a big part of the French Revolution. It was also remember the Arab Spring in like 2011? Okay, and that started with one guy in Tunisia, really kind of lit that on fire. At the core of that was food costs and food availability. Okay, and if you look at like the damage that has been done by the Arab Spring, and you can say, hey, like ultimately it might be good, it might be bad, whatever your opinion is, but of the Arab Spring, it really, like, it hasn't ended. Libya is a completely dead state. There've been going on civil wars. There's warlords. You can watch like open slavery auctions going on on the internet in Libya.
No
they're
shit.
just selling slaves like it's some fucking port in 1728.
Holy fuck.
It's fucked up there beyond belief, and nobody talks about it. Syria, that was, I think 2014, it kind of reached its peak, where, Obama had like the famous, like, they were going to draw a red line and we're going to go in, and then then we obviously didn't. But that war's still going on. Yemen, complete failed state. They're battling constantly amongst themselves, but also against Saudi Arabia. It's another thing and that all started with the Arab Spring, because there is this idea that it's called democracy of bread. Okay. And it's an idea that the people of the country, doesn't matter what the country is, and it could be, free and open democracy like, we've had here and other places, or it could be a more tyrannical dictator state. But so long as the government provides food and, now more modern times, energy to the people will be like, okay. They might not like everything. They might feel oppressed, and there might be legit oppression. But if the vast majority of people have access to food and energy, the society typically remains pretty stable. And then in places where it doesn't, you see failed states, revolution. So French Revolution, Arab Spring, the collapse of Venezuela. Venezuela was this great, and we've done an episode, and that was a long time ago now, maybe 2019. They had a complete collapse of their government. They still haven't really recovered. It's just out of the news cycle. No one really cares anymore. They got a lot of problems going on in the world. But
haven't we been going to them for oil though?
I think, but they're like, they can't produce the way that they should, because they're so corrupt and failed, and so many of their facilities are shut down. So we're going to them.
That would be a great opportunity for them to get back on their feet, it feels like.
Yeah, but it's like they don't know how. Mm-hmm. And it's like the state, that's like the government owns all, like that's when it kind of went to shit, is when the government they collectivize and basically are like, hey, like we own all the oil now. And some states that works, like a lot of the Middle East states, like Saudi Arabia owns all the oil, and you can say it quote unquote works, but they're able to still have production. And Venezuela, they just completely lost it. So they'd have to like really spend a shit ton of money, either us or them or private business, to get those oil facilities, refineries and pumping turned back on. It's not something that they can do overnight or even within a couple of years. So they might be able to get some more out, but they've been under sanctions too. But the thing that really spurred those revolutions, or the massive protests in Venezuela, was out of control currency that was worth nothing, because they were just printed, and you could not get food. Like people, like we did an episode on that, where they had such food shortages in Venezuela that children were starving to death at a rate that they were starving to death so much that the government came in and said, listing a cause of death as starvation in the hospital, if doctors did that, they made that illegal. Okay, there was such a crisis and such a controversy that the government said that you're no longer able to say that the cause of death for these children on their death certificate is starvation. Okay, that was happening that much. That was that big of a problem. But that, when you saw like they're really trying to it's Maduro, really trying to topple Maduro, a lot of things had collapsed in the last 15 years. It wasn't until the food prices and availability got out of control that people just took to the streets and had an open revolution that ultimately has not been successful, but I think it's still kind of going on. And then we're starting to see that pop up other places in the world now. Okay, so you see it's going on in Peru. They've had people in the streets complaining about the price of food, availability of food. Argentina, Indonesia, Tunisia, and India are like notable protests where people are just like, what the fuck is going on? We can't even eat because we can't get access to food. And it's June 20th right now, so 21st when this airs. We can't even get access to food. And this is a time of year where you're not necessarily reliant upon food that was grown in 2022. So, because you don't like it's a growing season. So you plant in the spring and then you harvest in the fall and process, and then it's available like the next year. So we haven't even begun to see the real ramifications, escalation of this crisis, and it is going to be a crisis. And you can just, National Geographic, global food crisis looms as fertilizer supplies dwindle. Okay, and they have there's all sorts of articles out there. That one was from May 22nd of this year. So it's like as we get into the fall, when that harvest is coming, and you have this combination of what we opened the show with all these fires, disruptions, rising inflation, rising costs of energy, limited availability, plus rising costs of food. It's going to be a real problem probably starting at the end of this year, end of 2022. And, there's no end in sight. And people are like, they're forecasting, I was watching something, I can't remember where this was exactly, but they had this guy on, he's a commodities expert, and he's talking about, the prices of food. He's like, I think this is probably like a week or two ago. He's like, I think by the fall, we're going to see the price of a carton of eggs be at or over $12. Okay. For a carton of eggs.
No.
Now,
really?
Yes. $12 for a carton of eggs. Now, I was in Whole Foods yesterday and
probably $12 there already.
So I like fancy boy eggs. I like organic. Like I'm kind of specific about like the eggs that I like. The eggs that I get were $11.49. It's the highest I've ever seen.
What is it typically?
I would say last summer that they were anywhere from $4.99. Usually you pay like $1 or $2 premium. So now the eggs that I get at Whole Foods were $11.49, and like your standard egg at Whole Foods was $8.49. So, and then I went to the Jewel on Southport looking at eggs, and a carton of eggs, like just your generic shittiest bottom of the barrel egg, was $6. So we're already like on our way there, and that's like a dietary staple. It's like eggs were always like a cheap source of protein.
Yeah.
Like I can't have steak, I can't afford the chicken.
Fucking Rocky chugging them in a glass.
Rocky, I mean, I was like White Sox Dave. I know when he was, he was really trying to save up for the house, and there's like, and I went through the same process where it's like you have to have a pretty big nut when you close to get over the finish line, your cost to close, and it's like, it's a lot. So you have to really watch your spending. So he was having eggs all the time, okay, and he's like, yeah, I'm just eating eggs like twice a day, but it's like, and
does that anyway.
Well, yeah, but I think he does
twice a day instead of once a day.
Yeah. So, but he was really, he was going because it's a cheaper source of protein. But pretty soon it's not going to be.
Yeah.
Like your price per calorie with eggs is going to be, shit. So
now, will shit ever go back though? Because you're always like, oh well, it has to peel up because of, supply and demand.
Yeah.
But like, will it ever pull back? Because I feel like once you see prices raise, like it rarely goes back, unless if it's something like gas, which is so spiky.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, but there would have to be like significant policy and just global event changes.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need Ukraine and Russia to come back online, and you need to have, domestic production of oil. You need to have other energy resources where things just get better. And I'm not an expert in any of this shit. So as it looks right now, I feel like we're not. The short answer is I think things will probably normalize someday, but you're kind of going against the clock here, where it's like you gotta get it taken care of before things just completely fall apart. Because if you can't have people just starving in the streets because they can't afford food, and it's gas prices are through the fucking roof.
Any stabilization on that in the future? Have you read anything about that or no?
Nothing.
We did that
nothing
episode probably a couple months ago,
and it's way worse.
Way worse.
I think it's probably depends on what. I don't think it's going to go back. So I think it was what was it at the end of last year?
It's like fuck. It's so expensive, man.
It is insanely expensive. So gas prices in retail gasoline by year. Okay, so in January 2021, the gas prices were $2.42 per gallon as a national average. And right now we're up. I mean, if you look at May, let's throw out 2020 because a lot of that was impacted by COVID and people staying home, and like, why aren't Dave had the thing on Sirius, like, why aren't they paying me to drive around in my car?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but like in 2016, February 2016, we had a national gas average of $1.87 was the national average for a gallon of gasoline. And now, like, you're looking around Chicago and you're up around $7 almost. It's fucking insanity. And, and that's like and it's up everywhere, So if you're in the suburbs of Illinois or you're rural Illinois, like when we went hunting with Sydney, we drove, basically the whole way was rural, right? You go through rural Illinois, rural Iowa, all the way out to Nebraska. Gas wasn't cheap anywhere. It was over $4 every single place we were going, and that was a couple months ago. So it's worse now than it was then. But we live in the city where you can do public transportation, you can walk a lot of places, you can divvy, like, you have options, right, to get around. But if you're 30 miles from a Walmart, that fucks you up. Like, you have to build that into your budget.
Time.
So like this, I think people, like you and me, we might kind of lose sense of that, how it impacts the rest of the country, because it's just not necessarily like we see those high gas prices, but you have the electric. That was very smart on
Great. Honestly, I feel like a genius.
You should.
I feel like I keep joking with people, and I say, I predicted this.
Yeah.
I knew this was coming.
I saw a headline that we might want to look into sometime soon too. So I won't talk about it too much because I just don't know anything at this point. But the EU is considering declaring lithium, which is like the main ingredient in a lot of batteries, as toxic.
Oh, really?
So what that means, like, I don't know what that means, but that could be fucking, who knows? Maybe batteries are just out. I don't know. So there's all sorts of like weird things going on. And then it's like, this farmland thing, like, where that's becoming more and more like privatized by a few people. Like Bill Gates is the largest farmland owner in the country. That's fucking weird. So there's just so many like odd things going on. And then the prices just keep going up and up and up and up. And if you're one of these people who are like, hey, like I'm living in Nebraska and my household income is $75,000 and I have to travel to get groceries. I have to drive, say 20 miles, which I think is fairly common. Like you just like, we can't get food to feed our kids because it's too far away and the gas prices are high. And then when we get there, it's $12 for a carton of eggs. So like that's like a real problem that has instant impact on people. It's not like my 401k is down, fuck, and like that's a problem too. Like obviously what happened in 2008, but you're like looking at that as like your retirement thing. But if you're on like let's say even go one step further, you're like a 67-year-old guy couple, whatever, and you're both collecting, you're living basically on Social Security, that you paid into that system. Well, you that money doesn't go like you always hear, like he's on a very fixed income. Well, you just can't afford things the way that you used to. So there's only so many things that you can cut before it's like just cannot live, and or certainly cannot live comfortably. And it's getting very, very kind of bad and scary out there. And how these, the fires of these food plants impact things, I don't know. Are they connected? My gut says probably not. But it's still like a major problem.
I'm just guessing. I didn't read in anything, but I've got the conspiracy theorists are saying maybe some of this is Russian influenced.
No? I think it's more like the people who, they talk about like the Great Reset and Klaus Schwab. And Klaus Schwab is this guy from the World Economic Forum. And he has like these quotes. And it's like a program. It's like a who's who program. Like all the richest and most powerful people and government people, they all get together in Davos, Switzerland, and, pat each other on the back, and it's almost like a TED talk for the super, super elite. But he says things like like Justin Trudeau was like in that, like was educated there, and they try to groom like these world leaders. And Klaus Schwab is on the internet, and you can see him like, oh yeah, like one of our people is in Canada, one of our people is in Argentina, and he has a quote that says, you'll own nothing and like it. Okay, when it's just like, and again, I'm not an expert on that. I haven't really looked too much into that, yeah. But the conspiracy, the crazy conspiracy out there is that like this is a coordinated effort to really, shrink people down and shrink down what people own and their autonomy and things like that. And like the guy from Australia, the Prime Minister of Australia, he came out of that program too. And then it's just something that, that they have like, people make all sorts of claims about them. I don't know anything about it, to be honest. But it's just like some quotes you're just like, that's, I don't like the sound of that.
Yeah.
So,
so at the end of the day, it's not, it's a high number. It's weird, but you don't think it's like,
I don't think it's some coordinated. Yeah. I don't think so. That's my gut on it.
You giving some context too about like, like an airplane just crashed. It's like if you're at a restaurant and there's a bunch of restaurant fires and a candle turned over and it lit someone's napkin on fire.
Yeah. Right.
And a lot of okay.
And then like these places that are refrigerated, okay, like those chemicals to do like mass refrigeration are highly explosive. So if like, so you're going to, not only you're going to have a fire, you're going to have a big fire. And same thing with, the fertilizer plants have like, crazy combustible. And then there's one thing that always stuck out with me too, is that, 100 years ago, I'm going to be directionally correct on this. Okay, I won't have the exact number, but people spent a much higher percentage of their income on food because it was harder to get, it wasn't as manufactured, it was local, and that was just necessary because it was pre-refrigeration, coast to coast highways and railways that could just get food like from anywhere to anywhere. Like if you had an orange for Christmas, like that was like an unbelievable treat if you lived in the Northeast. My grandparents used to talk about that. And then even in like in my old job, I met these people from Poland who grew up under communism, and it was like if they got blue jeans or like a piece of fresh fruit for Christmas, it was like the best Christmas ever. So like that was a thing back then where they just you didn't have access to it. The trade-off though, okay, was that your food was much higher quality. It was, like you had, things grown locally, didn't have all the fucking chemicals. It wasn't like all carbs and sugar. It was like good, local organic food. So people were in general, had less chronic disease back then than we do now. Mm-hmm. And their chronic diseases were usually associated back then, not from diet, but from working conditions, like if you were working in a factory or if you were smoking, like those were like the main chronic diseases, as opposed to now where it's diabetes, heart disease, different forms of cancer, things like that are really brought on by diet. But so you spent more on food, but you got better quality food, and that was the trade-off. And that was another one of these trade-offs too, where it's like, hey, like, we're going to have a global economy, right? So that was what, when people were passing NAFTA in like the 90s and like all these free trade agreements, it's like, hey, like, yeah, like people might, we might lose some jobs and the economy will have to adapt, but because we're going to lose manufacturing because it's just so much cheaper to make it elsewhere. But all of your goods will be cheaper. And that was kind of like the selling point in the trade that, whether it was people knew that or not, that was something that was openly discussed. Like, you will be able to keep prices low. Well, prices aren't low anymore. Prices are through the fucking roof. So all of that, it sounds like that whole promise of the global economy sounds like it was kind of bullshit. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll see how things kind of shake themselves out here. I am kind of an optimist by nature and think things will ultimately just be fine.
Okay.
One way or another, I think things will be fine. But it is like unsettling when you read your history. I think that's why it's so important to read history. Like, who the fuck knew about bread wars? Well, Marie Antoinette and all these things all throughout it. I mean, that goes back to like sometimes the fall of Rome. People think that was part of the issue too. And if you look at like even in the Gladiator, right, when they had the new emperor come in, what was he throwing into the stands of the Colosseum? Just loaves of bread. Okay, like that was just keep the people fed and happy, and so it's very like the number one, people need food and shelter more than anything else. And if you have your rent go through the roof, like I know another girl who's like I just can't afford to live in the city anymore, so she had to move out to the suburbs. So it is like a real back in with her parents. So she has her student loans and she can't afford, like her rent like doubled, this year. Like, hey, your lease is up in July. Your rent's going to, I think it was like 17 or 16. It's going to be up 32, okay, for the same apartment. Last year was 17. This year it's 32. Like, I can't afford that. I got to move back home.
Crazy. And it's just such a swing from in the middle of COVID when it was like they were dying for people to giving deals left and right. Yep. So it's crazy shit, man.
It is.
And it all comes back to Strauss-Howe every time.
I mean, every time. I know.
Every time it comes back to the Strauss-Howe episode. Go watch that episode. Just Google the dog walk, type in Strauss-Howe theory, and you will see what we're talking about when we say that, because we talk about it just about every time we do an episode like this. So,
scary shit.
Yeah, it's scary shit. Hopefully it normalizes and everything stabilizes. So, Chief, thank you.
Yeah, anytime.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow. We got some cool episodes this week, so we'll see you then.